Welcome back to the Elite Performance Podcast. This is episode 20, and today our guest is Ryan Faer, who is the performance coordinator for the Cleveland Indians in Arizona. Ryan has a unique past history that has led him to his current position with the Indians, and that includes stops with the Los Angeles Dodgers, Stetson College, a private business, and for the past year, he's been a high school strength and conditioning coach at DeLand High School in Florida. Ryan and I to discuss some of the unique aspects of working with high school athletes, the challenges and the benefits of working with this population, and some of the great impacts and changes you can have on young kids' lives, but also some of the challenges of working within that environment with a lot of athletes in a small space with one coach, etc. Ryan is really known for his work in the field of baseball. So we also dialed into some of his thoughts on training overhead athletes, what he thinks works best for arm care, how he approaches pregame warm-up for pitchers and position players, and many other aspects of the world of performance training for baseball players. Overall, it's a great episode. Ryan does a great job. He shares a ton of good information, goes deep into his answers, put a lot of thought behind each question there. And it's a great episode, and I think you guys will learn a ton from what Ryan has to share. And he's one of the best young coaches in our industry, and so a great person to learn from. So without further ado, let's go talk to Ryan. Welcome back to the Elite Performance Podcast. Today on the episode, we got Ryan Faer. Ryan, how you doing?
Good. How you doing today?
Hanging in there. Let's get started right away. You just took a new job with the Cleveland Indians. So what does working in professional baseball in your current position entail?
Yeah, definitely. First off, I just want to thank you for having me. This is an awesome opportunity. I'm really, really thankful to have the platform and just to be able to have this conversation with you and record it so others can kind of listen in and hear us talk shop, because that's really how we're doing. So for me, my new role with the Cleveland Indians, essentially on paper, it's the Arizona Performance Coordinator. All that really means, it's a new title, but really it's a position that they've had in the past. The main responsibility, especially at this point of the year, is serving as the rehab coordinator from a strength and conditioning standpoint. So working alongside our coordinator with the physical therapy team, our coordinator from the athletic training team, the entire medical staff, and try to come together to provide the best care for our athletes that are currently recovering from injury, surgery, and things like that. The reason why they kind of gave it a title change is there's two components that are being added to the job, and first and foremost is kind of a developmental piece, and I think it's why it was a great fit for me personally to come out here is taking kind of an onboarding approach with the newly drafted athletes. When we get to June and July, when those athletes get drafted and they get brought in, we have 20-25 players, trying to figure out where those players are at kind of in their training age and in their playing career, and then trying to streamline them into the Cleveland Indians program. The Indians, when I got here, I'll tell you what, incredibly impressive what they already have in place. There's a lot of longevity in their staff. There's people that really absolutely know what they're doing. They're experts in our field, and they have a program that's already, that's been running for years. So for me, it's about coming in, being just kind of like a cog in that machine, and just finding a way to streamline the process and having somebody in place to do that, so that when these athletes come in, they don't necessarily have to jump too many steps to get into our strength and conditioning program. It's almost like a block zero approach, like you would see at a college or a high school, but trying to do it at the professional level and kind of cater to those athletes' needs. And then when we get to the off season, the Indians run, just like many organizations do, they run off season camps and things like that, instructional league. So being able to have somebody that's based here year round and being able to be a part of that regardless, because sometimes certain staff members can't make it out during those time periods. So having an extra person here during that time and coordinate between all of our different components and disciplines between our entire medical staff, and making sure that everybody's on the same page and in the best interest for our athletes.
Yeah. Let's talk about your path to this point. So what's your education, what your certification, et cetera, your past history of coaching leading up to this point?
Certainly, yeah, and hopefully I don't want to talk too long on this, but I've enjoyed my path. It's been kind of unique, but it's been really rewarding. So basically, when I'll start at the very beginning. When I was 18 years old, I graduated high school. Decided not to go after any collegiate baseball opportunities. I grew up playing baseball from 4 until 18. It's the only sport I ever played year round in Florida. Was part of that whole early sports specialization thing before I even knew what that was. So, and was just doing it because I love the game. But unfortunately, I was a right-handed pitcher, about a buck 50, a buck 60, threw about 82 miles an hour, and it had cut on the ball without even being able to control that cut. So not a lot of opportunities to play at the next level, and I didn't want to leave the state at the time, so I just decided to stay home. But I knew I wanted to get into coaching. I don't see myself, and I didn't at the time growing up, see myself in doing anything other than sports, and especially being in baseball. So about my senior year, I kind of learned what a strength coach was, started to kind of read up on it and what degrees that you would need to do that. And then as soon as I graduated from high school, actually the head coach that had the baseball program for about 15 years at DeLand High School, he was no longer the head coach. They parted ways, and so they brought in a new head baseball coach, and I happened to be, of all places, in the weight room working out the summer after I graduated, and they brought in the new head baseball coach, Andy Lyon. And I introduced myself, asked, hey, if you ever need any help, just let me know. I don't know if you have a staff or anything, but I'd love to help out. And I'm going to be around at least for another year because I was finishing up my AA degree. I got some college classes done during high school. So I'm going to be here another year at a JUCO, just going to school. So would love to be on the field. And he said, well, would you like to throw some BP to our freshman team tomorrow? And like I said, I throw cutters. I'd never thrown BP in my life, but I was like, sure, I'd love to come out and do that. And basically the rest is history. I coached high school baseball year round all throughout college. I was able to find a program at the University of Florida that did physiology and kinesiology completely online, which enabled me to not – at that point, I'd been coaching for about a year and a half. I was concerned that if I left, it'd be hard for me to find another role where I'd have as much responsibility coaching at the high school level. So I stayed home. So during that 4 years, I went from just, throwing BP to the freshman team and calling pitches for the JV pitchers to running warm-ups to training the team with probably what is, looking back on it, one of the worst training programs in the history of strength and conditioning because I didn't know what I was doing. I was 18, 19, 20 years old. And then I was also fortunate enough that during that time to get an internship at Stetson University when they first started up their strength and conditioning program. I believe it was the fall of 2012. I reached out to Bradley Loki, who's at the time was the director of strength and conditioning there. I didn't realize it, even though Stetson was in my hometown. I didn't realize that they had just started the strength program. I knew football was new, but I didn't know the strength program went along with that. So at the time, this was probably September or October of 2012. He, when I emailed him, he said, well, we just started the program in August. I don't have any assistants or interns. Let's at least come on in. Let's just talk. So again, one of those things, I walk in there and the rest is kind of history. The next day I was helping do training sessions. And before I knew it, I was running training sessions on my own with various teams because the director had to go out. Coach Logie had to go out and run conditioning for the football team. But at the same time, he had teams training at 6 a.m. So with no assistants and no other interns at that time in place, I just kind of hit the ground running as a junior in college, was working at the college level. So spent some time there. Was able to get promoted to a kind of a paid position, which was a blessing just to make any money doing it for the first time after spending, a couple of years, coaching year round in the trenches for free and just for the love of it. And finally, just to take a big jump going into my senior year, I was able to get an internship with the LA Dodgers. So that was my first pro ball experience. This was the summer before I graduated. Went out there, spent 3 months under Chris Dunaway, who was at the time the minor league strength and conditioning coordinator. Be a great mentor of mine now, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity to work alongside him. And from there, came back home, did one more internship just for academic credit to fulfill that side of it for Florida in the private sector with Jeff Higuera at Competitor Gym. And then the Dodgers came back and asked if I'd like to interview for a full-time position that they had. And then I spent the next year with the Dodgers full-time. So from there, I've been in and out of professional baseball a little bit, and I was at the high school level full-time for the last year, starting a program at my alma mater, DeLand High School, and now with the Cleveland Indians. And as far as certifications go, really the main one is just to have that CSCS and got that. I took that test as soon as I turned a senior in college. I took that test as soon as I could. And then as soon as I graduated, got the certification in the mail. So also have my performance enhancement specialist from NASM. And some other ones I'm looking into right now, but just happy to be coaching and to have a job in this great field.
Yeah, that's a pretty intensive background, but you got experience in high school, college, private, and professional. Just off the top of here, what are some main kind of differences that you saw between each of those kind of environments? I know it's a loaded question, but say private versus public, whether it be high school and college, and then compare that with professional level.
Yeah, it's definitely a loaded question in that there's so many differences and similarities between all of them. I think a lot of, as far as from a similarity standpoint, I mean, it really just depends on the mindset you bring. A lot of people say that at various levels you can't make an impact. Like at the professional level, it's hard to make a personal impact. I think depending on how the mindset you bring to it, I think you can make an impact. I think that's what's so great about our field is that it's a platform to help change lives and improve lives and kind of teach things about life and create relationships that we just get to do it through the vehicle of sports. So from that standpoint, there's a lot of similarities, but there are quite a few differences. So I mean, just between the professional baseball world and level itself, I mean, you're predominantly working in season, especially as a minor league strength coach. My role is a little bit different now, but my previous roles working as a minor league strength coach, you get the athletes in season. So a lot of times the programming is not the forefront of your job. It's not the main requirement. Now we want a program to manage stress and we want to try to create adaptations in season because in the off season, you may not see them but for a month, and then they have 2 or 3 months where they're on their own. So you want to get as much done as possible. But at the same time, the ultimately the most important thing is the games, their performance on the field. That's what the front office for the organizations look at. That's what the player cares most about. So really you're trying to fit in as a piece of that. You're trying to manage stress and really, I mean, you have to be so adaptable as a strength coach. I mean, in professional baseball, if you're in rookie ball, you may shoot at some of the higher levels, you may not actually have a weight room in any of the facilities you're at. You might have it at home, but you can't control what the team on the road has. So when you're playing and traveling and every 3 or 4 days you're on a bus heading somewhere else, you obviously have the travel demands and you have sleep and food and all these different qualities that are and aspects that are seeing reduced quality and harder to control. And so you have to be adaptable. I mean, you might have a great training program, but you may not be able to implement it because you don't have the equipment or the athlete just doesn't have the faculties to do it, considering all the stress they've undergone traveling and playing every single day. Because baseball, there's just so many games. It's almost every day. So from that standpoint, it's less of being a computer strength coach and more just being a manager of people and stress. When you look at like the collegiate level, I wasn't there full time by any means, so I can only attest to my experiences there. But I think it kind of bridges the gap in between the two. You spend a lot of time with your athletes in the weight room, and if you're lucky to get one of the jobs where you have very few teams, 1 to 3 teams, you get to spend a lot of time with them, be on the field with them, and manage stress and have to be adaptable the same way in professional sports. But at the same time, you get them in the off season. So there's a lot more being the traditional strength coach that most people think of when they think of training an athlete and developing them and building them up. And the high school level was, I mean, I can speak all day about how passionate I am about the high school level. Honestly, the toughest decision in my life was leaving DeLand High School and doing that because I was so passionate about what I did. And in my time working as a high school strength coach voluntarily, working with baseball and among a couple other sports in college was probably the most fun I've ever had coaching, and I didn't make a dime. The impact that you can make on a daily basis well exceeds any of the downside to it. That being said, there are tons of challenges, which I know we want to talk about a little bit more. So I'll save talking there, but just the ability to build a kid and to show them. I mean, you might have a 14-year-old that has terrible self-confidence, that's uncoordinated, and you can turn them into somebody that, whether or not they go on to play at the next level, just somebody that has confidence in themselves. They develop as a person. They find worth and value in being healthy and happy, and the relationships you can create. It's incredible. So that's a great level, and I'd advocate for anybody that truly is in this field to make a difference. That's an avenue that you definitely want to check out.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about that a little bit. Talk about some of the challenges of being a high school strength and conditioning coach.
Definitely. So there's a lot of, it depends, I guess, where you're at, where the challenges lie. So first and foremost, it's tough to get the jobs availability wise. I know, especially in the state of Florida, off the top of my head, probably 5 or 6 full-time strength coaches, and by full-time meaning they're full-time employees that have benefits and they're salaried. There's plenty more that are contracted through facilities, but to actually be on campus and be with the kids, 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day, well, as class time, and then after school and be there 5 days, 6 days a week. There's not many of them in the state of Florida. It's more prevalent in other states, but there are plenty that are still behind, just like Florida. So the availability of the jobs is just the first challenge altogether, and being able to get the funding and some of the resources sometimes. I was so thankful that DeLand High School saw the value of having a full-time strength coach there and was able to bring me in, and we were able to build the program. And what was even more encouraging is that when I left, they hired another strength coach, which was incredible, because being a first-time strength coach at a school like that, I didn't know if the program would stay. It takes so many resources. You have to allocate a PE position because it's a public school. So, everybody wants a PE position. It's just such a great spot at the high school level, especially for sport coaches. So I wasn't sure if they'd still allocate that spot to a strength coach, and they did. Coach JT Thomas took over the program, and I'm so incredibly happy for him. But as far as the day-to-day, programming is probably the biggest challenge, but at the same time, it actually ends up being it can be really simple, or I thought so in my opinion. So the challenge that you'd see initially is that you have so many different kinds of athletes, right? You have a lot of multi-sport athletes, especially in Florida. We do have athletes that play many sports. But because of that, there's actually a lot less training time, and it's hard to necessarily figure out what is a true off season and in season. And on top of that, like in my situation at DeLand High School, I had we weren't block scheduling, so I had a class, or I had multiple classes 5 days a week for about 45 minutes a clip. By the time they dress in and dress out, we're looking at 30 to 35 minutes. So I might have a kid in one of my classes that I have 5 days a week, but he's also on the baseball team, and the baseball team comes in and trains 2 to 3 days a week, but he wants to be with his team. So all of a sudden you have to make accommodations for the program. You have to maybe slow them down and pull the reins back a little bit. And at the same time, you might have, like, my football team trains 5 days a week, but we have weightlifters on the team. And if you're not the weightlifting coach, like I wasn't, it's a little harder to manage what they're doing. So there's basically just a lot of components going in various different directions. So while that looks like a challenge initially, it actually makes things quite simple, because you end up having to just generalize the program, or I did in my case. And I thought making things simple and general was probably going to be the most effective way to go about it. So the program ended up being extremely straightforward. We just tried to build quality movement, tried to build strength. And when we were done building strength, we tried to build some power once we felt comfortable doing so. And then we'd keep going through the process like that. And then we would just make sport-specific adaptations or changes to the program if need be. So for maybe an overhead athlete, change something up, but still keep it within the basic template. So that becomes, that's probably the biggest challenge is programming. You also, you have to understand that you are dealing with a high school athlete who, at the end of the day, they love their sport, but in the full context of life, you got to understand that they're probably, the majority of them, not going to play at the next level. And so you have to manage expectations. And then at the same time, you might have to understand that a kid just doesn't have the motivation that you want him to have. So it's tapping into finding why he's training and still, or why she's training, and how to best connect with them still. There's parents, there's a lot of things to deal with, but if you're following your true passion and you're doing it for the right reasons, those challenges really, they end up being challenges that'll excite you more than anything else, or hinder the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about, something I didn't, to consider is you have kids in your class during the day, and then their team comes in after school. What percentage would you say of your athletes, say sport athletes, were in one of your classes throughout the day?
Yeah, so in the classes themselves, let's say if I had somewhere between 35 and 55 students generally, I would say 50% is probably close to right. Maybe 60% are athletes. But any given class could be different. I remember my fourth period class, we only had about 20 kids. It was always light the whole year. And so it was a higher percentage were athletes. And because there were so few kids in the class, if an athlete wanted to be in one of my classes, it was easy to move them in that class. So it was a higher percentage. But if you go to I want to say it was my fifth period class was there were quite a bit of non-athletes, and we had a mix. So in public schools, so we had boys and girls. We had freshman to senior. We had athletes and non-athletes. So it was a giant mix. And then you'd go from one semester to the next. So once we hit Christmas and we came back for the second semester, new kids were added into some classes while many stayed. So it's like, how do you reintroduce, a block zero type phasing for a kid that says, oh, but I've been training for 18 weeks and I'm so advanced, or I feel advanced. So again, a lot of dealing with expectations and just trying to manage the best you can with a variety of athletes.
So in that situation, say you had someone first semester and then they came back second semester and you kind of restarted over, or just generally in high school, you could have a freshman boy that hasn't hit puberty yet and weighs 95 pounds soaking wet, and then a senior that may be able to play at the next level, pretty developed and maybe just had 4 years of training underneath their belt. How do you progress, regress in those situations against sports, genders, age groups? So let's say you had maybe a squat for one of your workouts today. Did you have different people doing a goblet to a body weight to a back? Talk about some of those breakdowns of how you differed up between those developmental levels.
Definitely. So ultimately when I started back in August when I was full time, I'd actually gone on campus about this time last year and was a full time sub and was working with just a couple teams after school. But it was just to get me on campus to start kind of laying the foundation. Once I became full time, I ran basically what I call my Block Zero program. Stole the idea from Joe Kemp and the many other coaches that are running it, but just found my foundational movements and tried to find the best way to teach it. It ended up being about a 6-week program where we progressed, or we started with body weight for the squat, for the hip hinge, and for the push, and a couple other movements, or very lightly loaded movements for the rest. And progressed it very slowly. So when we then got to the end of 6 weeks, they had about 12 weeks where they could, and I did, just to give you an idea, I did 3-week training cycles. They had enough unloads on their own. The class periods were short enough. We have a free day once a week. So the training wasn't so intensive that they needed an unloading. And it was so early in their training process. So we went 3-week cycles. So with those 12 remaining weeks after the 6-week Block Zero, they end up having 4 training cycles where they can get after it a little bit, and we can start to progress. When we hit the second semester, so coming back from Christmas, I'm gonna be honest. The first week, I told all the kids that were returning, and I told the group, addressed the group. I said, "Look, you guys are gonna have to wear it for a little bit. I need you to go through this first week. Okay, I'm gonna hold everybody's hand just like we did in the very beginning. But guess what? 1, it's just a week of your time. 2, really, you just went home you left school for 2.5, 3 weeks for Christmas break. We haven't done a lot. You might not have trained at all. So we're going to start back at the basics. We're going to rework things. And guess what? Even Olympic lifters who their career and their life is spent around moving a barbell, they have coaches and they have recovery periods and they have technique work that they do. So I think we can start back at square one for 1 week. And then from there, I was able to progress. And I was able to kind of I didn't do cards for the majority of my classes or my teams. So I'd put it up on the board and we'd have just basically modifications underneath. So if it said squat at the top for 1A, underneath 1A, there'd be some subsections for various categories of athletes or students that could progress and regress. Also, those sport-specific modifications or adaptations to the program went in that area too. So once we got through the first week, established expectations with the new students, let them get a feel for being in a weight room, because some of them had never seen a weight room in their life. And I had kids, like I had a girl in my 6th period. She told me, she goes, "I'm gonna be honest, I was really scared about having this class, and now I'm having fun." I think she ran cross country, but she never really considered training. But to me, that was awesome. About 6 weeks in, she's telling me, like, I was scared of the weight room, and now I'm having a good time. So it's really about just trying to get them worked in, feeling comfortable, so that we can actually progress without there being any fear.
Yes. You talked about some of the challenges of only having maybe a 30 to 35-minute, class period for many of your classes there. How did you fill that time up? Your programs, you talked about maybe a squat was 1A. What was 1B? Once you have goals for that, how did you make the most of that limited time frame that you had?
Yeah, definitely a good question. Because this leads to areas that I wanted to improve and areas that I think needed to be improved. I'm excited to see what Coach Thomas does now that he's come in. He's a good friend of mine. So for Dewan, they went through the interview process with him and thought he was the perfect fit. And I was stoked because I know he's going to take basically what I laid down and amplify it times 100. So I can't wait. that being said, going back to what I was doing at DeLand, basically we did like a 3 to 5 minute warm up at the most. And honestly, if you walked in, you'd be like, that's what they're doing. I mean, we'd start with jumping jacks. We'd do 20 jumping jacks every day. We would do, we called them sweeps, but you've probably like toe touches. So just a nice, easy hamstring warm up. And then we'd break into whatever kind of fit some of the movements we were doing for the day. So if we were going to squat, we might do an ankle grab. We would then take it into a deep squat and hold, or a cook squat, something like that. Either way, we'd always end up back at a high plank or the top of your push-up position, just to reinforce that position and that posture every single day. We might take it into that downward dog position to stretch out the upper body, the T-spine, and then you push those heels to the ground, get calves and hamstring as well. And if we're going to squat, we might do some ankle pumps in that position, or some ankle mobs while we're in that downward dog. Stand back up, do some trunk twists, some windmills. 3 minutes in, we're pretty hot. We're ready to go if it's done right. It's general. It's really basic. And a lot of times it can get repetitive, but that's why, depending on what the movements are for that day, we'll change up some of the meat in the middle. But at the end of the day, with 35 minutes at the most, it's about getting them hot quick, making sure they've gone through some ranges of motion that are appropriate for the movement they're going to do in the workout, and get them ready to train. From there, we would go, if we had a teaching progression, that would be first. But if we weren't teaching any kind of exercise, we'd go right into the lift. Most of my classes, my football team, which is my 7th period class, we'd be on the whistle. The rest of my classes, once the first 3 weeks of block 0 were done, they were on their own completely. I'd coach them, obviously, but they were free to go at their own speed. If it was a squat, so 1A, so to speak, on the program was going to be whatever the emphasis is for that day, whether that was an upper body or a lower body. We ended up getting 3 total body sessions in a week. So the first one was going to be a squat. The second one was going to be some sort of a press or a pull. And then the third one was going to be, it started with an RDL. Once we progressed, it turned into a deadlift. That was the end goal by the end of the second 9 weeks, was to be able to deadlift. We would pair that with a core exercise. So 1B would always be core no matter what it was. And we'd progress that. It started postural and pretty static, and then we'd speed it up and make it a little more dynamic, and we'd make it a little more challenging. 2A would always be whatever the opposite is, or the inverse, So if we're squatting, we're going to pick an upper body exercise, whether that's going to be a push or a pull. Generally would be a pull. 2B would be another lower body exercise that would complement whatever the squat was. So if we were squatting, we were going to do a posterior chain. And then if we had time, we would get down to 3A, B, and C, and it would generally be some accessory upper, lower, and then a mobility exercise. That's kind of how I tiered it out. And then if you just went to your other 2 total body days, it would just depend on if it was an upper body emphasis day, then you would just see that be the primary, and then everything else would kind of follow suit. What would be the complement to that and the accessory work? But there would always be a core and a mobility in there. For me, I thought core was the most important thing to tackle in the very beginning, so that was always going to be 1B.
Awesome. So let's say a freshman walks in your weight room. Okay, what are some of the most common, strengths and maybe weaknesses that you typically see in this kind of age of an athlete? So freshman, what are the most common dysfunctions or areas that you initially addressed and want to make sure we want to address these areas because they're maybe new to the weight room or just that kind of age?
Yeah, sure. Great question. As a 14-year-old freshman coming in from the population that I worked with and that I've seen over the years, even when I was coaching and it was on a volunteer basis, I was mostly working with just baseball. I was still getting exposed to 14-year-olds coming in, even if it was a little more of a specialized population. It tends to be trunk or core stability ends up being one of the biggest issues, or one of the weaknesses of these athletes coming in. And just postural awareness, just, knowing how they should be standing, how they should be holding positions, and why it matters. Just that kinesthetic awareness in general, just where their limbs are. Because for a lot of them, around that age period is when they've either started to grow or they're about to grow. And a lot of times the joints and the limbs end up being in some funny positions, and they have yet to figure that out yet. Mobility, I would say, generally was actually more of a strength than anything. At that 13, 14-year-old age, I never saw that as a big limiting factor on movement. It was more the stability and just basic strength. Like, hey, especially with my baseball players, I mean, we could swing it back. We could throw a baseball at 80 miles an hour as a freshman. We do it all day long. we look so fluid on the field, getting ground balls and throwing them over to first, but then you try to get them to squat for the first time, and it just doesn't look good. But as soon as you start to ingrain those movement patterns, they adapt so quickly. That's probably the greatest strength of working with a 14-year-old with no training age or very little training age, is they're going to adapt to almost anything you throw at them. That's why really even bad training programs that you see at some high schools, because they don't have somebody credentialed or certified in place, they still get the athletes stronger because they get stronger quickly thanks to those neurological adaptations. But at the same time, if we can use that time to develop things like trunk stability, if we can also develop those movement patterns, it ends up being more effective and efficient training. And I'd say the last thing is specifically when it comes to movement, the difference between the hinge and the squat is usually an area where the athletes struggle. But honestly, I mean, in very many populations, that's an issue. But definitely when you have a kid coming in early on, they're not going to know the difference. So being able to teach those two things and differentiate and put them in a position to differentiate them so they can feel it over and over and over again ends up being something that's pretty beneficial.
Yeah. Teaching that squat and hinge to a 8th grader, freshman, every coach should go through that. Teach a 12, 13, 14-year-old an RDL versus a squat, because that will humble you real quick as a coach.
Absolutely. And that's, it was something that challenged me so much in the very beginning. And then I personally, I found something that worked for me with the populations I've worked with both of those. That didn't work 100% of the time, but it ended up being pretty effective. And so that's why the RDL ended up being the first thing I taught before a deadlift. A lot of times you think if you can just get an athlete to bend over to the floor, and if you can just move their hips just a little bit, move their back, and just cue it right, you can get them in the right deadlift position. And maybe you can, but if I've found that if I can teach the RDL first, the deadlift ends up being so much better, because you can teach them how to set up for a deadlift properly and not squat down to the bar or squat down to whatever you're using for your deadlift. So you can really differentiate the two. But yeah, it can be so humbling, especially a hip hinge pattern can be tough. And there's still a couple bugs that still get me that I have a hard time breaking through. I mean, if somebody does not know how to tilt their hips at all, anterior and posterior, like they have no feel for that, and you try all these different ways to make them see it, whether it's visually or you actually by hand can move them, no matter their age. You get an adult and a man that you can actually get your hands on their hips and move them, and they can't feel it. Yeah. That's still a big challenge for me, but it's definitely worthwhile trying to tackle.
Yeah, so talk about your progression. You said you found something that really worked. What is that hinge progression? Because it's one thing I tell my interns from day one is, you know what, I'm going to let you guys, get your hands dirty teaching a young or first timer how to RDL or hip hinge, because like you said, it's so humbling that kids don't have spinal awareness or hip awareness. They can't differentiate between a squat and a hip movement. It's really, extraordinary how people just lack just general awareness of, what's going on in their body. So talk about your progression that you found really to be successful.
Definitely. This has worked really well for me. Basically what we'll do, we had a lot of wall space outside of our weight room. So on RDL day, or the first day of teaching it, we go through our warm-up, we take everybody outside, and I put them all up against the wall with their back up against the wall. And actually, before I even do that, honestly, I talk them through the whole thing. I don't like to be that guy that sits there and talks for 5 minutes and loses attention, but I think it's important for this specific one with a younger athlete to be able to walk them through what they are going to feel and not going to feel, because the feel is incredibly important, and they're going to lose interest in the very beginning if they don't feel anything. And I'll explain. So to kind of elaborate, I'll walk them through it, and I'll go up against the wall first. I'll say, guys, take a look. This is what we got. I'm going to tell you to get up against the wall. I'm going to have your heels, your butt, your upper back, and your head up against the wall completely. Your feet are going to be right underneath your hips. That's your power position. So anytime I say get to your power position, that's it right there. From there, I'm going to have you walk off 2, maybe 3 inches at the most. Your feet are going to be right underneath your hips. You're going to have soft knees. You're going to bend it like 10 to 15 degrees, but just a little. Nice soft knees. Chest up nice and big. Relax your arms, and then I just want you to push your hips back to the wall. Now notice the difference, and I'll kind of try to show them. I don't want you to put all your weight against the wall. I just want you to tap the wall with your hips and then come back up. And I want you to do that 3 times. Now, when we do this, you're going to look me like I'm crazy, because you're not going to feel a single thing, and you're not going to know if you're doing it right. I'm just telling you up front so you know. But when we go through this, you'll start to feel a little more. I'm going to take you off the wall a little more. We'll do it 3 times. I'll take you off a little bit more and do it 3 times, and then we'll see where we're at. So then we put them on the wall. They go through all of this. They do their first 3 reps and they have no idea what's going on because they don't feel any feedback in their hamstrings. But still, just trying to get them to understand, tap the wall, don't lean against it. From there, we walk them off another inch or 2. Again, tap the wall with your hips, come back up. At this point, I'll ask them, I say, who here is feeling the stretch in your hamstrings? About half of them are going to raise their hand. The other half are either not doing it correctly or we're just not far enough away from the wall yet. We'll walk off a little more, and then all of a sudden you'll start to hear that, oh, yeah, I feel it. Oh, you start to hear it. And then you hear some frustrations because people don't. So after we do that final 3 times, so it's about 9 reps at that point, I'll tell them, okay, guys, these are the 2 common flaws I normally see. The first one is that we're squatting too much. Remember when I said soft knees? If those knees are bending too much, you're not going to feel anything in your hamstrings. And if you look, it's just a squat like we did on day 1. Also, if you're reaching too much, like you're bending at your back to get to the floor, all you're going to feel is that lower back. You're not going to feel your hamstrings. Okay, so those are the things we need to work on. We'll head inside. And then from there, I don't go body weight because it's just too tough to feel without having some kind of a feedback externally like the wall. But I'll put them in lines down the middle of the room so that I can see them and they're kind of not really paying too much attention to other things. They're really locked in. And we'll do a 3-second eccentric, a 3-second isometric, and then we'll come up concentrically, just normal speed, with a 10-pound plate in their hands. And they'll be in their stance. We'll go through 5 or 6 reps of that. Generally, they start to feel it at that point. And then we'll just progress. We'll go 10-pound plate, 25-pound plate. And like with them in lines like that, it gives me an opportunity not only to see them, but I'm counting out loud. I'm counting the seconds, but I'm sprinting around the room every time I see somebody get too squatty. And might put my hand right in front of their knee and say, okay, don't touch my hand with your knee. Or if it's a boy and I feel comfortable with him, I might grab his hips and pull them so that he feels that posterior weight shift. Just things like that. It becomes very coaching intensive at that point. Now, just to go one step further, after a week or 2 of doing this, once we've progressed and I feel comfortable and I let them go to the barbell, let's say we're probably 3 to 4 weeks in, as we added weight, first of all, we'll take away the isometric at the bottom, the hold. So we'll still go a 3-second eccentric once we get to 25, 35 pounds, but I'm not going to hold them in that bottom position. It just ends up being a position that irritates them, and they're going to start asking, should I feel my back? And then they start questioning. But then once we get to the barbell, a lot of times you'll see that separation between the barbell and their body. So that bar gets away from them to get them to understand how to activate those lats and pull that barbell tight to the body so we can really get a nice hip hinge pattern and put the emphasis where we want it. I'll actually set up red resistance bands or light resistance bands around the room hanging from the chin-up bars and just tell them, look, guys, you don't have any reps that you have to do, but we're going to go through just a little bit of a teaching tool here. Do a set with the bar, walk over, and just do a straight arm pull down. So if you think about it at the cable rack at the gym, you lock those arms out straight on the barbell, you pull that bar down, and you feel those lats activate. That's the feeling I want you to have when you have the barbell. And so hopefully that clears up that one last little bit of a flaw that's there technique-wise and makes it about as effective as we can with the hip hinge. But then it's a long process from there. Like I said, there's a lot of things that tend to get in the way. If you have an athlete that is stuck in a posterior tilt when they try to hip hinge, it doesn't matter how much you say big chest or how much you say butt back, they're still going to have that curve at their lower back. So we need to get them to dissociate their hips from their lower back. But long-winded, but hopefully that kind of that illuminates like kind of what I did and what worked for me as a hip hinge progression.
No, that was outstanding. That's one of the best progressions I've heard. And like you said, obviously dealing with high school kids, you're getting 40 kids in the class, 25, 40 kids in the class to the hip hinge. That's an incredible process. And I think a lot of young coaches and coaches in general could take a lot away from that progression, Ryan. That was outstanding. So let's switch gears a little bit to baseball specifically. You're with the Indians. You have a baseball background. So what are some key things you do with baseball players to ensure arm care?
Yeah, definitely. I will preface this by saying that I'm just getting into the Indians organization. They have their philosophies. They have the things that they've done very, very well. And I'm still trying to learn all those things. And they've obviously been incredibly successful. I'm speaking just from my personal experiences, what I've done at previous stops, especially at the high school level. For me, I do a lot less direct cuff work. And let's talk about the high school athlete right now. I do a lot less cuff work directly with them than most people probably do. And it's not because I don't think it's important, but I think it's something that they end up doing a lot on their own. When I see them do it, I coach them up on it. to make sure that we're doing it properly. We're in the right positions to actually utilize the muscles we're trying to utilize and not be in an injurious position. And within the lifts themselves, we will do probably 2 out of the 3 lifts with baseball. We would do some sort of, whether it's a banded face pull or an external rotation, something that got the external rotators of the shoulder, because that's probably the most important thing if we had to pick one aspect of arm care. But ultimately, what I tried to do is put them in positions to use the arm and the shoulder, the entire shoulder joint, as one unit in a more unified movement, so to speak. So I guess basically being on your hands and feet is the best way to put it, and the most simplest way to put it. Okay, being in a push-up position, being in a crawling position, being in a quadruped, to where you're actually having to feel where the arm is in relation to the shoulder blade, and so that those joints of the entire shoulder, but specifically the glenohumeral joint, are working in unison. So that scap is moving on the rib cage, it's moving on the T-spine. And it's not locked down. And we're not just locking it down and back and now rotate the arm. We're actually moving freely. So teaching them to get in the right positions. We get a lot of serratus activation if we can do the push-up right. I'm a big push-up and high plank guy. So we're going to do a lot of that and learn to flatten out the scap so that it's not winged out completely, and then being able to move through those positions. And really at the end of the day, it integrates the lower body, the trunk, the upper back, and the shoulder is one unit, which is really what happens in sports. I mean, it's all unified. It's not just you putting your body in one static position and then rotating through the shoulder. There's a lot more to it. So for me, the general rule of thumb, you always hear, the 2 or 3 to 1 pull to push ratio, but I break it down even further, and it's not exact, but the idea is to try to have more reaches and more push-up type variations than I do presses. So while I row a lot, we do a lot of pulling. We'll still have some pressing, but we're actually going to have more reaches. So landmine presses and push-up variations and complexes to try to get the shoulder and the rest of the body, especially the upper extremities, to move in unison.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I mean, I got to pitch, work with a college pitching staff, and they do Jaeger hit bands before they throw. Then they throw, which is a rotator cuff exercise in itself. And they do Jaeger bands afterwards, and they come in, what can we do stuff for the rotator cuff? Like, no, you just did bands before, after throwing. Throwing in itself is the most demanding cuff exercise you can do. I mean, like you said, it's all about congruency of the scapula and the humerus. So that's a good approach. And reaching is a big thing now, is just getting people to get upward rotation of the scapula and some elevation. So a great approach.
Exactly.
So you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but baseball is such a long season. I mean, it never ends. There's no off season really. So what are your goals in season, and what are your priorities for athletes to get in season?
Yeah, it's a great question, because professional baseball is so unique in that, one, it's, most professional sports, yes, you're working in season with the athlete predominantly. But baseball, 162 games at the major league level, at the minor league level, it's not all that much less. And if it is, it's a shortened season from the standpoint of the calendar is shortened as well. So you're not playing less games over the same period of time. You're playing just one less month, but just as many games within that time period, or significantly less months, but still just as many games. So they're always going. So it's important from our standpoint that we just develop good routines, positive routines. We're trying to basically ensure that no matter where they're at or what is thrown at them, that they develop the kind of routines that'll keep some sort of consistency. So, when you're in rookie ball and you roll up to a ballpark that has a clubhouse that doesn't have AC, that smells like mildew, if you're not able to get good foods and you have peanut butter and jelly as your food, as your pregame, if the bus is running late, if you hit traffic, whatever it might be, the idea is that you still have these consistent routines in your entire life, in your entire training day, and then leading up to game time, that allow you to have some sort of consistency and some sort of comfort within the day, within the outing or the training session. So, I touched on it earlier, it's so much has to do with just managing stress. So much is especially at the younger levels, which is the levels I've worked at a lot in rookie ball, is you have kids that come in and they might be coming from, for example, somebody from Florida coming out to Arizona, high school kid. He's leaving mom and dad for the first time. He's never had to cook for himself. He's never had to really even select meals, probably. He never had to do laundry. So while a lot of these things are taken care of for them initially when they're here at the complex, at some point that does change. So they go to affiliate life, and all of a sudden the only laundry that's done for them is their practice and game gear. So now they have to do their own laundry. They have to try to find their own foods. They have to have a budget based on the money that whatever they sign for and whatever they're making from week to week and paycheck to paycheck. And then you're throwing a training program at them when they probably have never trained, or maybe have never trained before in their entire lives. Or it's just a new routine. Even a college kid coming in, it's a lot different than what he might have been doing at the previous level. So much than playing games every single day. And then you're trying to educate them on top of it. You throw a bus, 12-hour bus rides, and then social influences off the field. All of a sudden, that is literally the fire hose and taking it straight to the face. So it's like, how can we grade out some of these new and really major stress, things that are bringing stress into your life? How can we grade those down to where at least it's a little more progressive and not just all at you at once? So again, about developing routines, it's about educating, and it's about managing stress. I think at the younger levels, once you get some of this stuff established, you can try to develop them. Games, the performance on the field matters a little less. It does still matter. Ultimately, the front office cares, the players care. There's money on the line, there's jobs on the line. But when you still have maybe 3 to 4 years, if not more, of time ahead of you in your career at the very least, we have time to try to develop strength, build those qualities, and make you a better athlete all around. And then as time goes on, then we have to really focus on the outcome on the field. So professional baseball, definitely the duration and the repetition, it does lend to some challenges for sure.
Now, I know you worked in this, with DeLand High School, but what does your pregame approach look like for baseball players? So if you had your way, how would you approach the pregame warm-up for position players and pitchers for baseball?
Yeah, good question. The difference, ideally for a pitcher, let's say that's starting, I like a long, drawn-out process, but not because I want it to be really extensive or cumbersome, but I want them to be able to take their time. So to be able to get in all the components that we think are vital for a warm-up and to get you ready to perform that day, but just expand it as long as we can so you can go at an easy pace and gradually build yourself up. So for a high school kid, for instance, I've had kids that have wanted as extensive as we could give them, or as the best warm-up and preparation that we can give them for the start. And so what that might look like is for a 7:05 start or a 7 o'clock start, coming in, it's getting ready to go at 6 o'clock, which is kind of early for a high school kid if you really think about it, as far as an hour from game time starting to prepare. But going out to the field, going through a very light and general warm-up, just maybe 2 to 3 minutes at the most, but just to get the blood flowing. From there, they can go through some stretches that it's dictated on the routines they've developed for themselves and what they like. Some players like to do a little bit of static stretching, and since we're 50 minutes from game time, I feel comfortable with that. So we might do some partner manual stretching, or they might take a band and just stretch out some key areas. From there, they're going to go right back to their feet, go through an entire dynamic warm up to make sure that now they're really hot and ready to go. At this point, I like if something they like to do is some cuff work to get ready to go. If that's something that they found works in their routine, this is where it would be inserted right before they throw. We'll take a little bit of a break before they do throw, maybe a 2 to 5 minute break, get some water, come back, start throwing. I like the idea of throwing, and I've used it before, having a medicine ball used prior to the bullpen. So once we've thrown, taken a little bit of a break, we're now 30, maybe 25 minutes from the start, depending on if you're home or away, throwing a medicine ball to try to really just get that nervous system fired up, ready to go, get them thinking about moving with intent. Again, make sure no fatigue's accumulated. If they are a little, out of breath, giving them some time. Because again, there's not about being strenuous whatsoever, but if it's a hot, humid day and they're a little tired out, give them the rest that they need, let them go throw in the pen, and then we're basically ready to go. A position player, I don't think needs to be as extensive, especially considering they probably play every day and they've probably hit some BP before. But the starting pitcher a lot of times is lounging around before they take the field, or they've done some very light work throughout the day, but they've been just resting and recovering. So the position player might go through with the team or as an individual. And then once we get close to game time, making sure that we go through some movements that mimic what they're going to see in the game. For instance, a sprint, and do it at near full speed. I'm not a guy that wants to go out maybe at 100%, but at 90%, let's get moving, get out of the box quick, so to speak, on the, in the outfield, and make sure that when we take our first full sprints out of the box, it's actually not our first rep of the day, so that we're prepared and ready to go.
Excellent. Let's finish off here. What piece of advice would you give to young strength and conditioning coaches, in this field and looking to get into this field?
Yeah, some things that have worked really well for me. Everybody's path's a little bit different, but I think first and foremost, and I think you would fully agree, learn every single day. I mean, always try to learn, and it may not necessarily be from a book, and it may not necessarily be strength and conditioning, but try to learn something. And if you didn't do something to specifically that you denoted as, oh, this was my time to learn today, try to reflect on some of the things that you did and some of the interactions you had, and try to learn something from it. Just have some self-reflection. And then I think it's for me, it worked in my path, and I think it could help others, is to find a way to make the practical application from the learning. So for me, I was coaching from the time I was 18 years old until now. And it's given me so much confidence as a coach. I can walk into any situation. It might be completely over my head, but I'm not afraid to coach, and I'm not afraid to fail. So, taking what you've learned, but then try to find a way to apply it, even if you at first have to go just be a fly on the wall and watch a high school practice, and eventually ask if you can run a warm-up, which was my route basically. But it gives you an opportunity to coach, which is something that if you choose to just only learn from a book and learn from other people without experiencing it, you might lose 3-4 years of coaching that you could gain while you're going through college or your first few years out of college.
Yeah, it's a lot different. Looking at a textbook and then kind of apply those to 20 high school college athletes and actually interacting with the human being. Like you said, you coached for 3+ years for senior country. And that's what you got to do to coach in this field. So let's give me 3 books that have had a major influence on your coaching career.
Sure. So the first one, I always mention this one. It's Mike Boyle's Advances in Functional Training. It's just the first strength and conditioning book I ever read. I had a minor league strength coach back when I was 19 or 20 that I visited, that gave me a bunch of things to read, pointed me in the right direction from a blog standpoint, from books. And he said, read this one first. He said, it's going to break down a lot of things between movement, programming, facility design. You don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know what you're not, we don't know what you're going to need to know as a coach, but this covers a lot of it. So start reading that. It's a relatively cheap book, covers a lot. I thought it was a well worthwhile read for a strength coach that's first starting, and it was very influential on me early on. Periodization by Tudor Bompa was a big one. Just the way that it was written, so that everything kind of, each chapter built on the last one, and honestly repeated the previous chapters, to where by the end of the book you had no choice but to understand periodization a lot better than when you started, and understanding tapering and peaking and things like that. You had no choice but to understand it, because it was going to be in there over and over again. So that was a good one. And then I just recently finished a book that I think is going to be very, very influential. I feel like it's going to be a textbook that I'm going to look back at a lot over and over again. And that's, I believe it's Sports Injuries, Rehabilitation and Prevention. I might have misquoted exactly, but it's by David Joyce and Lewandon. They edited it, and then they have a bunch of co-authors that write each chapter, so that it comes from different angles and different experiences, and covers everything from just understanding what rehabilitation is and reconditioning, what they are and the differences, and then how to address injuries and things like that, which for me, being in a rehab coordinator position that I honestly never thought I'd be in, and having a lot to learn and being excited about learning all that, I feel like it's going to be a book that'll be highly influential on me personally.
Awesome. Let's go. You can now invite 3 people, dead or alive, to dinner. Who are you inviting?
I love this question. It really makes me think. It's going to be out of the box. I got 3 that are still living. The first one, I'm a huge Foo Fighters fan. Like, my bucket list is to go see the Foo Fighters wherever they're at. I don't know where that's going to be, but I love Dave Grohl. I'd love to have Dave Grohl there. I think he's hilarious. I think he's passionate about what he does, and he's incredibly talented. And I'm inspired by talent no matter what profession. So to sit down with Dave Grohl, who's been a legend in multiple bands and in his own right, would love to have him there. John Calipari from Kentucky. I think I could pick probably 10 coaches that are either retired or been a little more tenured or no longer with us that would probably be great picks and that I would love to learn from. But the thing about Coach Cal is that he's a current coach that is dealing with some very contemporary problems and challenges that I don't think most coaches see, and that's having the one and done factor is huge, and it's something that a lot of coaches in the past haven't had to deal with. The second thing is he deals with arguably the most talented players in that age group in the world, or the greatest collection of them at any one spot, and has to not only manage them when they're there, but he has to sell them on coming there when they may not be starters. And he's going to outright tell them, hey, you're probably not going to be a starter in your first year, and you may only be here 1 year still. But my goal is to still, one, win a championship, and two, to get you to the next level so that you can buy your mama a house and you can take care of your family for the rest of your life. And you're a McDonald's All-American. You could go anywhere in the country and start and get every single minute, but I want you to come here and share minutes. To me, like, to be a recruiter, to be a salesman, to also then wear the hat of being a coach, and somebody that cares about the kids. From reading his books, I'd love to spend some time with him. And finally, I'm a big, this is gonna be funny. I'm a big Dan Patrick fan. Like, I listen to sports radio. I love Dan Patrick. I love the Danettes. If I could, again, another bucket list thing, if I could sit down and have dinner with Dan Patrick, that would be awesome. I think he's an incredible person. I love listening to him talk. So those were the three that I came up with.
I think it'd be a fun list too. They'd be pretty funny guys. Coach Cal, he goes on. I was watching the bracket, announcements, and he's on there bullshitting with the going back and forth with the commentators. It was hilarious. He's a character.
Yeah, he is. You're right.
So tell us where our listeners can find you.
Yeah, so I'm big on Twitter. For those that haven't come across me yet, I probably use it too much, but I'll tell you what, I've met some incredible people that way. I've networked so much. That's why I use it, and I get to have some outreach to a lot of high school coaches and players as well. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is @Ryan_Faer. So that's my first and last name, @Ryan_Faer. I think my Instagram handle is the same thing. And for me, like, I like being a professional on all these social media sites, but at the same time, I like giving an insight into my life a little bit, because just like you and just like anybody else, like, I'm a coach, but I'm also a person. And I think to understand where I'm coming from as a coach, you need to understand me as a person. So you're going to see my dog. I have a puppy, Basset Hound, that I love. You're going to see me lifting. You're going to see a lot of different things, because I like to kind of like let everybody in. I like full transparency. I think that's important. So, and then finally, I have a blog. I have been slacking on the writing a little bit in this transition, but I want to ramp that back up. And that's my first and last name, RyanFairBlog.com, RyanFairBlog.com. So find me on any of those, and you can always reach out through those mediums, and I'd be more than willing to give you a more direct line of communication to answer questions or just talk shop in general and learn from other people.
Yes. Well, Ryan, I really appreciate you coming on a Sunday. Giving us a great rundown, going on for about an hour now of just sharing great insight into your past and your presence, what you do with your athletes. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you. I mean, like I said, it's an honor to sit here and talk shop and be able to let people inside to hear that.
All right, Ryan, have a good day.
You too.
Please join me in thanking today's guest, Ryan Faer, for that wonderful episode. Ryan really put a lot of thought and thoroughness into each question there. I came away with a ton of good nuggets, so I'm sure you guys did the same. Ryan didn't hold back. It was just a wonderful episode, and from a young coach who was one of the best young coaches in our industry, with a experience and history that's very extensive from high school to college to professional. So a lot of great information and great knowledge shared by Ryan today. So please, if you took something away, give Ryan a shout out on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, and thank him for sharing such great insight. Until next time, we'll see you guys again on the Elite Performance Podcast.